Well, we have a great show for you today, and one that will be titillating to your intellect, I would say. Why? Well, because we're going to be discussing some very deep, heady issues with one who thinks about such things quite often. He is a journalist, a writer, blogger. He is an Army veteran, a Black American raised in poverty in a trailer park, who ended up going to Columbia and then Harvard Law School. Uh, he speaks and writes with clarity of understanding. He is someone who you can tell from his writing has thought about the subjects on which he writes, much like Thomas Sowell. Now, I don't know that he is yet in the category of Thomas Sowell, because what Thomas Sowell is rarefied air, but he is a younger Thomas Sowell. And boy, do we need more Thomas Sowells in this country, and in particular, Sowell is now on, well, he's well into his 80s, 90s now.
Yeah.
Wow, it's amazing, just absolutely amazing. What a mind! What a great thinker! And our special guest, Shane Hashey, joins us today on the Victory Hour. He has written for Alpha News, certainly Washington Times, Real Clear Politics, many other national outlets. And as I said, he writes with smarts. And we're honored to have him on the show today to talk about some of the difficult issues, policy issues that we are facing. Shane, welcome to the Victory Hour.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So if you want to see some of the blog writing of Shane Hashey, go to Shane Hashey, ShaneHachey.com, and you can find his writings while we are talking about some of the recent things he has put together and put out there for our ingestion. Shane, tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your history, your background that brings you to the policy analysis that you're doing today.
Yeah, it's quite a journey. I'll do my best to summarize it. I would say a little bit in shorthand. You could kind of say now it's like a J.D. Vance story, very similar to that. Now that people are familiar with him, I read his book when it came out, and it rang very true. So, quick synopsis of my background: I was born in Bemidji, Minnesota. My mother's Black, my father's white. My dad was a disabled Vietnam vet, biker, and I was born in Paul Bunyan Trailer Park, actually, which no longer exists, but that's where I came from. And I grew up. I became politically aware probably around 12 years old because I'm a nerd. Right? We're the nerds. We're the political nerds here.
Yes, indeed.
I was very nerdy and intellectual, but like JD Vance, I did pretty bad in school when I was in high school because I had a little bit of a tough home life and a little bit tough life in my community. So I also joined the military when I turned 18 to get out of northern Minnesota and kind of the Iron Range where I finished up high school, Greenway High School. So I joined the military. At the time when I was young, I was a left-wing intellectual. It's pretty normal.
Weren't we all?
Weren't we all? Thomas Sowell was too.
Yes.
And very, very keen, reading a lot, thinking a lot, debating a lot. And at the time, I had this left-wing bias. I had never really been exposed to good conservative arguments. We didn't have the technology, we didn't have the internet like that when I was growing up. I didn't have that in my, in my household or my community. And you had mentioned recently on your show, I think with Tom Rosen, about shifting demographic changes actually, right? So when I was growing up in northern Minnesota, Iron Range, blue collar union mines, um, the thought of somebody being a Republican was ridiculous, laughable. No way a working class guy would be a Republican. Those are the rich guys.
Right.
You guys kind of talked about that last week, right?
Yes.
And so that's kind of the mentality I had. I was in the military police for 5 years, stationed in Germany for 3 years, deployed to Yugoslavia in the 90s under Bill Clinton, and spent my last year at Fort Hood. I came back, spent a year at St. Cloud State, small state school here in Minnesota, for those who aren't in Minnesota, and transferred to Columbia and ended up at Harvard Law School. So that's my journey.
Look at that. Columbia and Harvard Law School. They say these are institutions of higher learning. And when we come back after this short break, we're going to talk to one who has experienced Columbia and Harvard Law School, and maybe he can shed some light as to whether these paragon institutions of truth and justice are truly institutions of higher learning. You don't want to miss it. I mean, I didn't go to Columbia. I didn't go to Harvard. Am I worse off or better off? Kind of a fair question. Don't go far. It's the Victory Hour, and we'll be right back. Go to parkerdk.com. Why? Award-winning, well, some say an award-winning website regarding Parker Daniels Keyboard, premier litigation firm to downtown Minneapolis. ParkerDK.com. We'll be right back. Stay with us. We're back. I'm Andrew Parker. You're listening to the Victory Hour. We're talking to Shane Hashey, writer, journalist, blogger. Go to ShaneHashey.com to see the latest of his blog work on important policy issues of the day. Shane went to Columbia University and then Harvard Law School. And on the other side, we teed up a discussion about these institutions of quote-unquote higher learning. Shane, what are your thoughts, having experienced those institutions, as to whether they are actually teaching the youth of our country and providing them with an understanding of history, an understanding of an analytical abilities and skills so that they can make effective decisions about what is going on in the world, such as, well, for example, you might question whether trans folks, gay, lesbian persons should be supporting Hamas. I mean, some might question, well, what could possibly be the basis for them doing that?
Well, it would be ideological teaching for sure. There's a lot of context to understanding what it's like to be at a place like Columbia. So when I started my first semester at Columbia was January 2001, which was a big year in New York, you may recall.
Yeah.
And what I experienced at Columbia, in New York in general, crazily enough, but also particularly at Columbia, and it's only gotten worse. It's definitely gotten worse in the last 20 years. After an event, speaking of, moral relativism, not understanding right from wrong, as far as checking the box, great education, great degree, you can check the box. You can apply for a job and say, I went to Columbia. Actually teaching you how to think critically and understand the world in a grown-up way and to interact in the world, there's some big gaps. One of the things I experienced a lot after September 11th was talking to 18-year-old, 19-year-old men in New York City who come from good families, have every opportunity in the world, the most privileged people on earth, telling me that if there's a draft, they're going to Canada. Um, sometimes it sounds like we're exaggerating, right? Like we say these crazy things.
And this was after 9/11 when the U.S. was attacked,
This was in the
as we all
weeks,
know.
yeah, in the weeks after the September 11th attacks, which I know younger viewers kind of forget about. Some younger people forget that. Probably anyone under 30, it's just a vague memory to them. But I'd be talking to people, say, what are we going to do? What are we as a country going to do? Because I believe in a nation. I believe in America. I care about my country because my life wouldn't be possible if I wasn't born here. If I was born where I was born in almost anywhere else in the world, including Europe, including enlightened Western Europe that they think is so much better, I would have stayed in the place I was born, by and large. I am able to have social mobility, uh, achieve to my abilities, be heard, and communicate into the world, rise on my own merit. This is an American phenomenon. This is uniquely pioneered American phenomenon. So I have very strong feelings about my country. I'm on Columbia's campus, and we are 5.5 miles away from where 3,000 people were just killed weeks ago, months ago, when I'm having these conversations. And these young men are telling me they are so unwilling to fight for America that they will run to Canada and renounce their citizenship. I try to stay calm. Now it's been a long time. It made me pretty angry when it happened. So,
And just to connect that back to what I felt on October 7th, which is September 11, 2001 times 10 in relation to the country that it happened with, and the disconnect between what happened to the Jews, what happened to the Israelis through this heinous attack, and people in the streets in the United States, in places like Columbia, the same place that 20 years earlier you are talking about, in New York City, marching in the streets, supporting not the victims of October 7th, but actually those that perpetrated these heinous crimes.
the thing is, it's a mentality that did exist when I was there, but it's only gotten worse. I mean, kind of a tangent. Social media is a cancer. Social media spreads mind viruses in a way that was impossible before. You could not have the level of Gen Z, millennial communism, and crazy socialist thought without social media. So that didn't exist when I was there. Now we have that. It just amplifies craziness, right? Um, but when you say sympathy for the perpetrators, not the victims, I encountered that in New York City, where they actually killed people in our city.
Yeah.
I read a lot of Christopher Hitchens. He's probably my number one author, and I listen to him a lot. He has some crazy essays in his book, Love, Poverty, and War. His war essays cover his whole career. It ends up 9/11, post 9/11 world. And within weeks and months, his like 4 essays, and from until the end of the year in 2001, are him being excommunicated from the left for blaming radical Islam for 9/11 rather than ourselves. And I experienced it personally, and Christopher Hitchens wrote about New Yorkers, educated, the most privileged people you can imagine, having this sense, however they were taught, this guilt, so they don't even sympathize with themselves, Andrew. If you don't sympathize with yourselves as a victim of a terrorist attack, how are you going to sympathize with someone in Israel, in another country?
Right. Exactly. And it is a teaching, a political view, a world view that is simply foreign, and it is the seed of destruction of a democratic capitalistic society that Karl Marx wrote about. He said the defeat of this society will not come from outside, it will come from within. And it is that diseased seed of thinking that really creates an enormous problem. Shane, great insight. You, as you go through Columbia, as you go through Harvard Law School, as you look at United States Supreme Court precedent, including most recent case law on the issue of affirmative action. As a Black American, what do you sense about where we're at with affirmative action? Has it helped Black citizens of the United States? Has it hindered them? Has it held them down or elevated them in their spirit?
No, it hasn't helped. Look, I have my political views. I'm not a hardcore partisan. I can understand in 1964, 1974 saying, "Oh, look, how are we going to help people?" Right? And very frankly, my family experienced very deep poverty on the Black side due to things that happened in history. So I'm very familiar with that. I grew up with that. Um, but if in my lifetime we see affirmative action, you see that it's not working. One of the reasons that I consider myself more conservative now is that I'm results oriented. I care about what works. I don't care about what makes me feel good or what sounds good. This is kind of the Thomas Sowell type thinking. In 1964, I would say, hey, maybe this would fix things. Once you get into the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, you see it's not doing anything. I actually just finished reading the affirmative action case. I didn't read it when it came out at the time, and I just finished reading it in the last few weeks. And affirmative action, the problem is it's a way. There's a way to rig the system, right? So affirmative action, what it actually has done and would have continued to do, is help Barack Obama's children. It'll help. And I was at Columbia and particularly Harvard in the Black Law Students Association. Look, most of the kids who are Black students or minority or whatever, they're not the poor kids. Some of them are, but most of all, it's like the kids of lawyers and doctors and surgeons.
Privilege.
They're most privileged. Most of the kids there. So if you're making race a determinative factor, it's just a system to be gamed, and it's going to be gamed, and it doesn't allow for merit or saying, here's a poor white kid or a poor Jewish kid or Asian kid or a poor Black kid, but your circumstances are what matters. And another thing that I have a very strong feelings about, I don't believe in Black mediocrity. I believe in Black success. I don't believe that Black kids can't study, can't do better on tests. It's literally exactly correlated to how many hours you study. So I'm very against affirmative action. I'm happy to see it gone.
When we come back after this short break, we're going to talk to Shane Hashey. You can tell already, if you've been listening, even a modicum to this show, why it is I wanted Shane on the Victory Hour. Few have given such clear thought to such important issues, and I love being around those people. When we come back, I want to talk about what we now know as identity politics. Yes, indeed. And, not created by, but put on steroids by Black American President Barack Obama. And since President Obama, it has only continued to grow, but he really created it and added gasoline to the fire. And so we're going to see what Shane Hashey thinks about identity politics in all of its grandeur. It'll be a short break, so don't go far, but do if you've got your computer there. Of course, I like the yellow pad and number 2 pencil, but if you want to look it up, ParkerDK.com, Parker Daniels Keyboard, Wise Counsel, winning results. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back. It's the Victory Hour. I'm Andrew Parker. We're joined today by special guest, writer, journalist, Army veteran, and has an excellent blog at ShaneHashey.com, ShaneHachey.com. Shane, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. On the other side of the break, we talked a bit about Columbia and Harvard and students coming out of there and how we deal with them. Some of these protests against the state of Israel, against Jews, generally, death to Jews, death to Israel, and uh, support for Hamas, the heinous murderers engaging in Nazi-like conduct, really is troubling. And Dylan, if we have the Reagan clip, I think it is apropos.
Those people told you for days in advance that if the university sought to go ahead with that construction, they were going to physically destroy the university. Now, why did you
negotiate many times?
Negotiate? What is to negotiate? What is?
The university is a public institution.
That's
it's an
right.
Important institution
But the university,
for all of its own community and for the community of Berkeley that live around it.
All of it began the first time some of you who know better and are old enough to know better let young people think that they had the right to choose the laws they would obey as long as they were doing it in the name of social protest.
Darn right. Law and order. And when you are inciting violence, you should be taken down and arrested and removed. When you take over a public or even a private school institutional building, you should be taken down, removed, and jailed. And that's what law and order is about. We don't follow law and order at our border, so it's not surprising that our institutions of higher learning are not following law and order where they reside. However, it is no less wrong. And when we start to ignore the laws of this country, the laws that separate us from barbarism to a civilized society, that is the beginning of the end. What say you, Shane Hashey?
I saw that clip firsthand play out in my life. I was at Columbia in the 2000s, post 9/11, during the Iraq War, and I saw the adults leave the room. I've been thinking this for 20 years. I actually heard Douglas Murray articulate this recently. The adults left the room on college campuses. I don't know exactly when it happened, but it certainly happened by the time I had gotten there, and it's worse now. It's accelerated.
It's accelerated. And one of the people that accelerated it, as I have said, and many people disagree, it's my opinion. That's all it is. Right, wrong. Listen, I've had a number of opinions lately, predictions lately, and I've been wrong on my predictions lately. But I have, I'm recalibrating, and I am starting to have more hope in the American conscience than I was having for a number of years, in particular 2018, 2020, 2022, where the Democrats did far better than anyone expected in each of those three elections. Well, they went too far. But in my opinion, Barack Obama is the worst president in the history of the United States. People say that's outrageous. That's crazy. Well, how could you say that? Blah, blah, blah. Well, because he has accelerated the race to the bottom that exists now in the United States, the race to craziness that exists now in the United States. Joe Biden, with his 50 years in the Senate, isn't the one that did that, although he kowtowed to it for sure, and he caved into it, no doubt. But it was Obama that set all of that in place and continues to argue for it. And at the heart of it, at the foundation of it, is identity politics. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, Obama and identity politics are really tied together. I have to agree with you about Obama. I can say this in hindsight. However, I will say, speaking of being wrong, he fooled me.
Yeah.
He fooled me in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
He spoke like a moderate.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole podcast about Barack Obama. I think he was a breaking point. He should have been and could have been, the great unifier that he presented himself to be. He's brilliant. He's the second most brilliant, politically astute mind in politics of our life behind Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton is pretty blatantly evil. Obama, insidious, perhaps. Maybe less.
But you're right about it. He had the opportunity to really be a game changer, to bring this country together like no other, because he had the possibility of minority groups, the white majority, all coming together, cheering him on. And he destroyed it. He undermined it, in fact. He could have been in the same sentence with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln.
He has the brains. He doesn't have the character. There's things that it's so interesting that there is so much to be written about Barack Obama. However, no one wants to write it because no one wants to dispel the myth. David Garrow, a historian who I just recently became familiar with, he's apparently the biographer of Martin Luther King in our lifetime, wrote a giant book about Obama in 2017 that nobody read, nobody talked about. Everyone should look at Tablet Magazine. Interview with David Garrow tells you everything you want to know about Barack Obama, and it's very important to understand our political time now. One thing about him.
Tablet Magazine, interview with David Garrow, Garro.
RRO, yep, 2 R's, and I think it's October 2023. It's a long read. It's necessary to have an opinion about Obama and to understand where our country has been going and where it could be headed if we don't stop it. Obama he's a brilliant persuader, orator, charismatic mind, political mind, in the political mind of getting elected, the popularity contest. He's not a great leader. He could have been. He has the potential, but he's kind of shallow, it turns out. He's kind of vain, it turns out. But he's a great speaker.
Well, what is it? But what about identity politics? What?
Yeah.
Isn't the concept of it really something that we should strive for?
Yeah, obviously it's terrible now. I mean, here's the thing. People need to understand, if you're black in America, what you grow up thinking is that, oh yeah, I could be a millionaire, maybe I can start a business, but I'll never be president. This is what it was like to be black in America before Obama. Yeah, but we can never be president. That's what people thought. In 2008, I'm at Harvard and attending NYU law as a visiting student. I'm talking to black professionals and law students. They won't let it happen. In 2008, people are telling me they will not let it happen. So it was an important event. Like, his presidency was important. A black person becoming president was important. But in what identity politics has become, it's become all-encompassing in all these other areas, right? Of course, there's gender identity, there's racial identity. You could say economic identity, fight the man. What it has done, it's a permutation of socialism. It's a permutation of collectivism, actually. If anybody has read Ayn Rand, it's really collectivism applied to race or gender or other things. And so it makes us see each other or ourselves just as I'm this race, I'm this gender, I'm this gender identity.
And it gives a definition to, if you are this race, here's who you are. And there it is. And it's over. You try to be outside of that box? Oh, no.
Uncle Tom.
Yeah. Uncle Tom.
I can't count how many times I've been called an Uncle Tom.
Yeah, you and Clarence Thomas.
And worse, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Clarence Thomas, a man who actually grew up in dirt poverty. Just go to Wikipedia.
Yes.
Grew up in dirt poverty to become what he became. Yeah.
Yeah.
And tying back into Obama, though, Obama played into identity politics. First of all, people think Obama, struggled and had this tough childhood. Why do you think that? Because he's black? You think he grew up poor because he's black? There's a lot of rich black people. There have been successful black people for decades and hundreds of years, right? And so, to me, it's a little bit offensive for a black man who had a pretty good upbringing, went to an Ivy League feeder school in Hawaii. His whole life has been in the upper intellectual class, right? Then he goes to Columbia and Harvard, kind of playing this victim card. Yeah, because I'm black, I can play the victim card. You don't get to play that card. My mom grew up without hot water, okay, in rural Minnesota. Come talk to her and cry about your victimhood.
I had forgotten Obama went to Columbia and Harvard.
Yeah. I like to consider myself
Shane Hashi like.
I like to consider myself the anti-Obama.
Well, identity politics, just to put a period on this, it defines people. It's the exact opposite of what Martin Luther King talked about. It couldn't be more different. A person's character and their conduct. No, it has nothing to do with it. You're black, so here's who you are. Here's how you vote. Here's who you support. You're Indian. This is who. You're Jewish. This is who you are. White privileged.
Yeah.
And on and on. It is so disgraceful and undermining of the human experience.
And un-American.
And un-American, absolutely.
Has to be said.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a bit more about presidents of the United States. I want to get Shane's thinking dating back. Let's just go back to 1960 and talk about some of the presidents of the United States and where they might line up. Stay with us. It's been an interesting hour thus far, and we will continue on the other side. Go to parkerdk.com. Parker Daniels Keyboard, premier law firm, downtown Minneapolis. We'll be right back. We're back. I'm Andrew Parker, and you're listening to the Victory Hour. Our special guest today is Shane Hashey. Go to shanehashey.com to see his excellent blog. He is a writer, journalist, blogger, and one who is published regularly on various national news outlets. It's been a very interesting discussion. I wanted to ask you, Shane, before we turn to the presidents, about wokeism. Where are we at with wokeism? A lot of people have filled up the grave and are positioning the gravestone on wokeism here in this country. I am not so sure. As long as one of the major political parties in this country has a safe haven place for the lunatics on the far left and allows them to continue to enrich themselves within that party and endorses them, in fact, across the country, wokeism and its idea and its other leftist ideas are not going to go away.
Wokeism is just a form of, again, collectivism, socialism, communism, right? It's a human instinct. There's collectivism and individual. Again, Ayn Rand nailed it. There are individualists, which is what America was founded on, and which is why we are so great. We're lucky to have inherited this nation, and I'm so grateful for that, because we're founded as an individualist society. But the overriding human impulse for all of human history is collectivism, whether it's religious, social, cultural, philosophical, political ideology.
And what do you mean by collectivism?
Group identity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and now we call it identity politics. Well, we call it wokeism because it has this particular
Is it tribalism?
That's part of it. That's part. I mean, they're connected. I don't know if they're exactly the same thing, but they're definitely connected.
Mm-hmm.
And it's group oriented. It's okay to have some amount of group fidelity, right? That's a normal human instinct to, survive and thrive. But when that becomes your ideology and it becomes tribal, maybe it's when it becomes tribal, right? It becomes antagonistic. I can say I'm a musician, I'm a lawyer, right? But I don't have to be in opposition to everybody else who does it. Doctors are great, writers are great.
Yeah.
But I think it takes on a tribal aspect of competition and opposition to other groups, and that's what wokeism has done. And that's it. But it's at a deeper level a form of collectivism. It's not going anywhere. It has to be. Ronald Reagan said something like this: "The battle for freedom has to be fought every generation." Something like that. We can never stop being vigilant. We will always have to fight against the collectivist instinct. And if it's not secular atheism and wokeism, it'll be some kind of religion. It'll be some political ideology. It'll be some charismatic leader. We always have to be fighting against that.
You know, it's been interesting, and I've talked about this on the show in the past, that conservatives were assailed for many years as wanting to take over and make this country a Christian nation and require everyone to believe the way the most zealous religious believe, when in fact that never happened. You know, you've got McCain as a nominee, you got Romney as a nominee, you got Bob Dole as a nominee, you got H.W. Bush as a nominee. I mean, these are not fanatic social issue people. But on the left, sure enough, as they accuse the conservatives on the right for doing this, they now have done it in spades. And when I talk about wokeism, I'm talking in many respects about the social issues that they have pushed and actually shoved and changed in this country.
Yeah. Also, it's the only way Democrats can win right now. And you know, when you say, you know, people are ringing its ringing the bells on over its casket. Right now, the Democrats don't have any other option to win. You know, in their own mind, from their, I put myself in other people's shoes, my enemies' shoes, my opponent's shoes. They don't seem to be wanting to persuade people. I mean, that's what wokeism. You have a very cute dog here, but we can't be on lap right now. You know, wokeism. It's as an ideology. It's a shame tactic. You know, this new permutation of it in the modern form in the 21st century is kind of shaming. We would always have collectivism, but now it's like, no, you white, you bad. You know, I'm black, I'm a victim. You know, you're a man, I'm bad. I'm a woman, I'm a victim. And so that shame power, and it's only because, ironically, the powerful in society have acceded and become civilized. People who have privilege and power say, "Oh my God, I am lucky. Oh my God, I didn't earn this wealth I was born into." So then they let people shame them. That is the modern permutation. Democrats. I know the election just happened, but I don't see in the media, I don't see in people I know, in my little sphere that I'm in, I don't see people recalibrating, as you said earlier at the beginning of the show, just to make a better message. I have been saying this for a long time. Actually, when October 7th happened, I had a little bit of a thing that happened that helped. I became politically aware of something going on in the Twin Cities. And I was thinking at the time, you know, if we're going to lose, I expected to lose. I expected the Republicans to lose. And I said, you know, if the public isn't buying your crappy product, don't blame the public for not buying it. Blame yourself for making a crappy product.
And that's what happened to the Democrats.
Yeah, and that's what they've done now, and they're blaming the public.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
So who would you like to talk about in terms of a president, the best and the worst since 1960?
The best since 1960 is Donald J. Trump, hands down. And I say that not to be edgy, no irony whatsoever. He accomplished more in one term, and almost half a term, because the first part of his term was so chaotic. And
the last part was all pandemic.
I mean, in such a short time, what do you want? The economy, tax reforms, you know, getting through the first tax reform in 30, 40 years, right?
Energy.
Yep.
Deregulation.
Finally fighting back against China, who's been undercutting us, you know, for decades. And,
Yes.
you know, you could argue about tariffs or not. We have to fight back against China. They are malicious. So we have to fight against them.
And his use of tariffs worked. People can say whatever they want. We have a track record.
But
and we can look at them.
Number one, though, Supreme Court, federal judiciary. Right now, up until a few weeks ago, with the country hanging by a thread, and still very much so, the Supreme Court is the last thing holding this country and Constitution together. It is it. And we have 3 justices, and any other Republican nominee who could have feasibly been president would have caved on Kavanaugh,
yes,
for sure, and would not have the guts to have placed Amy Coney Barrett.
George W. Bush, who caved on one of his selections, far different selection.
Yep.
All right, we have less than a minute. What about the worst president since 1960? You know my opinion.
You know, I don't know. I have to agree with you on Barack Obama, but that could be a recency bias. You know, one thing I need to say that, you know, I think people should reevaluate Kennedy. There's a big
Jimmy Carter's in there, by the way.
I know Jimmy Carter's in there, but like there's the Kennedy myth, you know.
Yeah.
And he's even by the right and left is this golden age. I think we're kind of mesmerized by his good looks and his sex appeal or whatever. that guy was kind of a dirtbag and did a lot of bad things. I think he should be relooked at.
That's interesting. That's interesting. And as it relates to Jimmy Carter, yes,
Yeah.
one of the worst. But I understand that he deregulated more than any other president in the history of the United States. That's something to take a look at. Shane Hashey, thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating show, wonderful show. Go to shanehashey.com for Shane's blog. And until next week, have a great week.
Daniels Keyboard, Wise Counsel.
The
Winning
Victory Hour
result.
is paid for by Parker Daniels Keyboard, LLC.